Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Daily News Roundup. We've got a jam-packed show for you today. Everything from those international tensions that just won't seem to quit to, some pretty out there economic trends we're seeing pop up around the globe.
Yeah, it's a wild world out there right now. And of course, we've got some Oscar highlights to round things out, add a little bit of glitz and glam to the mix.
Always a
So,
good thing. So let's jump right in. First up, we're heading over to Gaza, where that ceasefire, well, it's looking more and more fragile by the day.
yeah, that second phase was always going to be tricky to get off the ground, and right now Israel and Hamas are just not seeing eye to eye.
So fill us in. What's the latest?
Okay, so Israel, with the US backing them up, is proposing they extend the ceasefire and also agree to like a partial release of hostages.
But it sounds like some key players in the region aren't too happy about that idea.
You got it. Egypt and Qatar, who've been super important in, helping to broker those earlier ceasefires, they're coming out swinging against Israel's decision to halt that humanitarian aid to Gaza.
Okay, so what are they saying specifically?
They're basically saying that Israel is using food as a bargaining chip, which, I mean, is a pretty huge accusation.
It definitely raises the stakes.
Mm.
So meanwhile, the rest of the world is just kind of watching and waiting to see what happens next.
Pretty much, yeah. You've got Arab states, world leaders, the UN, everyone's urging all sides to just, find a way to resolve this peacefully and quickly. No one wants to see things spiral back into violence.
It's a really tense situation, and we'll definitely be keeping a close eye on it.
Hmm.
Now, for a story that's sending shockwaves through the Catholic world, Pope Francis has suffered another health setback.
This is his third major health issue since he went to the hospital for pneumonia just a few weeks back. And now he's having to deal with acute respiratory failure. It got to the point where they had to actually intervene to clear his airways.
Wow, that's serious. But, I mean, amidst all of this, the Vatican is saying that he's still alert, he's still engaged, and his spirits are high.
He's a tough one, that's for sure. But these health problems are raising some serious questions, not just about his well-being, but also about the future of the church. I mean, he's had to cancel a lot of appearances lately, including some big ones like the Angelus Prayer and some Lent observances.
So all this is leading to a lot of speculation about what happens if he's not able to continue, who steps in, what direction does the church take.
Exactly. It's a story with huge implications, and we'll be following it closely. Now let's switch gears a little bit and talk about trade. The US has just imposed some tariffs that have a lot of people on edge.
Yeah, we're talking about some potentially big economic ripples here.
Definitely. President Trump just confirmed those tariffs on imports from Canada and Mexico, and that news it sent a jolt through the markets, that's for sure.
So what's the logic behind these tariffs? Protectionism? Or is there something else going on?
Well, the Trump administration is saying that these tariffs are all about protecting American manufacturing jobs and also tackling things like drug trafficking and illegal immigration. They say it's about leveling the playing field, making things fairer for American businesses and American workers.
But, I mean, there has to be a downside to this, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of experts have been warning about a potential trade war
Mm-hmm.
and all the global chaos that could cause.
For sure, there are risks. Canada and Mexico have already fired back with retaliatory measures, and there are a lot of critics out there who are really worried about the potential economic fallout, damaged relationships with some of America's biggest trading partners.
So it's a gamble.
Mm.
And we'll have to wait and see how it all plays out.
A gamble indeed.
Okay, well, let's move on from all that doom and gloom for a second and talk about something a little more fun. Though it actually does tie back into the economy in a pretty unexpected way. Get this. Rising egg prices in the U.S. are now leading to people renting chickens.
I know, right? Sounds crazy. But those egg prices have gotten so high that for some people, renting a few chickens is actually starting to make more sense than buying eggs at the store.
So is this like you get your hens delivered to your door kind of thing?
Well, there's a company up in New Hampshire called Rent the Chicken, and they've pretty much got the whole thing figured out. You sign up for a 6-month subscription, and they give you the hens, the feed. They even help you set up the coop. It's basically the Blue Apron of fresh eggs.
That's wild. But I kind of love it. It's like this super resourceful, sustainable response to those crazy prices we're seeing.
And you know what's even more interesting? A lot of these renters end up getting attached to their chickens. Like they become pets and they end up just adopting them for good.
I can totally see that happening. Okay,
Yeah.
so back to the world stage now.
Yeah.
France is stepping up and trying to broker a 1-month truce in Ukraine.
Yeah, it's a bold move. President Macron has put this proposal on the table for a 4-week partial truce between Russia and Ukraine. The idea is to focus on protecting that critical infrastructure, things like air and sea routes, energy supplies, that kind of stuff.
So it's almost like a trial run to see if a longer ceasefire is even remotely possible at this point.
Exactly. They're hoping that by having this short-term truce, they can kind of gauge how willing Russia really is to engage in meaningful peace talks. And it would also give civilians a much-needed break from the fighting.
But let's be real here. Setting something like this up and then actually making sure everyone sticks to the rules is going to be incredibly difficult.
No doubt about it. There's a lot of skepticism about whether this is even feasible. And obviously there are different opinions about, if it would actually work, whether it would actually lead to lasting peace. But still, it's a big deal that Macron's put this out there. It's definitely got people talking.
For sure. Now let's shift gears again and head over to Japan. They're battling a huge forest fire right now, and it's on track to be the biggest one they've seen in decades.
It's a scary situation. Those dry conditions are like fuel to the fire, literally. And this thing has just spread so fast. Thousands of acres are already burning, and they've had to deploy thousands of firefighters, helicopters, the whole works trying to get it under control.
It's heartbreaking, and it's just a stark reminder of how vulnerable we are to these wildfires, especially as climate change keeps making things drier and hotter.
Yeah, it's a global problem. And in Japan, thousands of people have had to evacuate their homes. The damage is already pretty extensive.
Okay, well, from one complex issue to another. Over in Nigeria, Muslims are being arrested for eating during Ramadan.
This is happening in Kano State, where the Islamic police are really strictly enforcing Sharia law. They're cracking down hard on anyone who's caught eating or drinking in public during the day, which is when observant Muslims are supposed to be fasting.
And this is obviously raising some questions about religious freedom and how religious laws are interpreted and applied in different parts of the world.
It's a really complicated issue. It highlights those challenges of balancing religious pluralism with individual rights within a diverse society.
Big questions with no easy answers. Switching gears now to the world of sports. Former FIFA president Sepp Blatter and French soccer star Michel Platini are back in court facing those fraud charges.
It's like a never-ending saga with this case. They were acquitted back in 2022 over that controversial payment. But the Swiss prosecutors, they appealed that decision, and now we're back to square one with this new trial.
And what are they saying? Still maintaining their innocence.
Oh, yeah. Both of them are saying that the payment was totally legit, just for some advisory work that Platini did. But the prosecutors, they're not buying it. This case has been dragging on for years now.
It just goes to show that even in the world of sports, these legal battles can have some major consequences for everyone involved.
For sure. It raises some big questions about accountability and transparency at the highest levels of international sports. Okay, let's talk about something a little different now, something that's becoming super important in the fight against climate change, detecting methane emissions.
So methane's a really potent greenhouse gas, right?
Yeah.
Way worse than carbon dioxide in terms of its warming potential.
100%. And as we're trying to get a handle on climate change, mitigate the worst effects, figuring out how to accurately monitor and control methane emissions is absolutely crucial.
But that's easier said than done right.
Oh, yeah. Methane is invisible, so you can't see it. And it can leak from all sorts of different sources, which makes it really tough to pinpoint exactly where it's coming from and how much is being released.
So how are scientists even approaching this problem? What are the tools they're using?
They're using a whole range of techniques, actually. Everything from handheld sensors that you can use to monitor methane levels right there on the ground to these incredibly advanced satellites that can scan huge areas from space.
That's incredible. And I'm guessing each method has its pros and cons, right?
For sure. And researchers are constantly working to improve the accuracy and the efficiency of these techniques. It's a really fascinating area of research, and it just highlights how important technological innovation is when it comes to tackling these huge environmental challenges that we're facing.
Okay, so now let's head down to Trinidad, where they're doing some really cool things to make their carnival celebration more environmentally friendly.
Trinidad's carnival is this massive, world-famous festival. Huge, colorful costumes, energetic music parades in the streets, the whole 9 yards. But all that revelry comes with a pretty big environmental price tag.
So how are they trying to make it more sustainable?
Well, there are a bunch of local initiatives popping up that are really focused on reducing waste. For example, there's this group called Carnicycle, and they're doing a lot to promote costume recycling and rental programs. So instead of everyone buying new costumes every year, they're encouraging people to reuse and repurpose.
I love that. It's all about finding that balance between tradition and responsibility.
Exactly. It's a global trend, actually. We're seeing a lot more emphasis on making large-scale events like music festivals and sporting events more eco-friendly.
It's really encouraging to see people taking those steps to celebrate responsibly. Now, for a story with some serious geopolitical implications, India is trying to decide how to modernize its air force, and they're stuck between choosing the American F-35 and the Russian Su-57.
Yeah, this is a big decision for India, and it goes way beyond, just picking the coolest jet. They've got to think about the costs, any technology transfer agreements involved, and how each choice aligns with their overall long-term defense strategy.
So break it down for us. What are the key factors at play here?
Well, the F-35 is this cutting-edge stealth fighter, top-of-the-line technology, but it's also super expensive, and there might be some restrictions on how much of that technology the U.S. is willing to share with India. The Russian Su-57 is a powerful jet in its own right, maybe not quite as advanced as the F-35, but it might come with more favorable terms.
So it's a tough choice. Balancing the need for the latest and greatest tech with the realities of budgets and international partnerships.
It's a classic dilemma, and the decision that India makes is going to send a big signal to the world about their priorities and where they see themselves fitting into the global landscape.
Okay, now let's talk about those ongoing efforts to establish a lasting peace in Ukraine. There have been lots of proposals and lots of diplomatic back and forth, but it seems like there are still some pretty major roadblocks in the way.
Yeah, it's a really tough situation. One of the biggest challenges is figuring out how to create a security force that's strong enough to protect Ukraine without requiring direct U.S. military involvement. And that's something that's a real sticking point for a lot of people in Washington.
So basically, they need to come up with a solution that keeps Ukraine safe but doesn't directly drag the U.S. into another conflict.
Exactly. It's about finding that delicate balance. A solution that addresses Ukraine's concerns while also taking into account the bigger geopolitical picture and the need for all the major players to be on board.
And then there's the humanitarian crisis that's unfolding in Afghanistan, where Afghan refugees who are facing deportation from Pakistan are stuck in this really awful limbo.
It's a terrible situation. We've seen this surge in arrests and detentions of Afghan refugees in Pakistan, and a lot of these people, they fled Afghanistan to escape violence and persecution. Sending them back could mean putting them right back in harm's way.
It's just a reminder of how interconnected these issues are and how desperately we need international cooperation to address them.
For sure. This is about more than just borders and migration policies. It's about our shared humanity and our responsibility to protect those who are most vulnerable.
Okay, so let's talk about technology for a minute, specifically the growing concerns about the vulnerability of GPS.
Oh, yeah. GPS is kind of woven into the fabric of our lives now, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I've heard that it's actually surprisingly easy to hack or disrupt. It is. And that's a big problem because we rely on GPS for so much. I mean, and everything from navigation in our cars and phones to air traffic control, those systems are all dependent on GPS working properly. And if someone were to jam or spoof the signal, it could have some really catastrophic consequences.
So what can be done about that?
Well, researchers in the UK, they're actually developing these alternative navigation systems, and get this, they're using atomic clocks.
Atomic clocks, like those super precise timekeeping devices.
Yep, those are the ones. The idea is to create a backup system that's way more secure and reliable than GPS, so that if GPS does go down, we have something to fall back on.
I mean, that's really thinking ahead.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show how technology can be used to address these emerging threats that we're facing. It's like a constant game of cat and mouse, isn't it?
Totally. As technology keeps advancing, so do the threats.
Okay, so let's wrap things up on a lighter note, shall we?
No.
Last night were the Oscars, and there were some seriously memorable moments.
Mikey Madison's win for Best Actress was a huge upset. I mean, that was her first nomination. I know, right? Her performance in that indie film was amazing, and the critics loved it.
And then there was that incredible musical performance by Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande.
Oh my gosh, that was breathtaking. The vocals, the choreography, the energy, it was all just perfect.
Speaking of powerful performances, Zoe Saldana's acceptance speech was so moving. She talked about her family's immigrant experience and dedicated the award to her grandmother.
It was a beautiful tribute. And it really resonated with a lot of people. That idea of representation and honoring the contributions of immigrants. It's so important.
For sure. Oh, and those Iranian filmmakers who won for Best Animated Short Film. Talk about a story of perseverance.
I know. They face so many obstacles just to get their film made and then to get it to the Oscars. It's a reminder that these awards aren't just about Hollywood glamour, they're also about giving a platform to important stories and voices from around the world.
Well said. And speaking of important stories, the Oscars also took a moment to pay tribute to the firefighters who battled those devastating wildfires in Los Angeles.
It was a really powerful reminder of their bravery and their sacrifice. And it also underscored how urgent the climate crisis is becoming. We're seeing these extreme weather events happening more and more frequently.
It's a sobering thought, but an important one to keep in mind. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today, haven't we? From wildfires and wars to chicken rentals and the Oscars. It's a lot to process.
Yeah, it really puts things in perspective. And speaking of perspective, it's interesting. Switzerland is taking this really unique approach to tourism right now. They're basically all in on attracting those super wealthy travelers. And it's kind of sparking a debate about, the long-term effects of that strategy.
Really? I mean, why
Yeah.
not try to appeal to, a broader range of tourists? Wouldn't that make more sense?
Well, Switzerland has been seeing this huge increase in the number of five-star hotels that are popping up. And those luxury travelers, they tend to spend a lot more money than your average tourist. So it makes sense from a purely economic standpoint,
Yeah.
but obviously there are some potential downsides.
Yeah. What are the concerns?
Well, the big worry is that if you only focus on catering to the super rich, you end up pricing out the locals. And you also risk changing the character of those Swiss resorts,
Yeah.
the things that make them so special and unique.
It's that age-old tension between economic growth and preserving the soul of a place.
Exactly. It's a balancing act that a lot of tourist destinations are struggling with. Okay, so let's get back to the Oscars for a minute. We touched on a few of the highlights, but there were so many great moments that we didn't get to talk about.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Where do we even begin? I mean, Mikey Madison winning Best Actress was a total shock.
I know, right? It was her first nomination, and she just blew everyone away with her performance in that indie film.
And then there was that musical number with Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande. I mean, talk about a
Oh my
showstopper.
gosh, their voices, their energy, that choreography, it was incredible. People are still talking about it.
And Zoe Saldana's speech was so powerful. The way she talked about her family's immigrant journey and dedicated her award to her grandmother.
It was really moving, a beautiful tribute to the importance of representation and, acknowledging the contributions of immigrants.
Absolutely. Oh, and we can't forget those Iranian filmmakers who won for Best Animated Short Film.
Yeah, their story is so inspiring. All the obstacles they had to overcome to get their film made and then to actually make it to the Oscars. It's a reminder that these awards can really be a platform for sharing those important stories and amplifying voices from all over the world.
And that's what makes them so special, right? It's not just about the glamour. It's about celebrating those universal human experiences. Okay, so speaking of celebrating, we also have to acknowledge that the Oscars took a moment to pay tribute to those firefighters who battled the wildfires in Los Angeles.
Yeah, that was a really powerful moment. It brought home the reality of the climate crisis and the incredible bravery and selflessness of those firefighters.
It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in protecting our planet, and that even amidst all the glitz and glam of something like the Oscars, there are these serious issues that we can't ignore.
It's about finding that balance right, acknowledging the hard stuff, but also celebrating the good. Oh, could you catch Adam Sandler's speech? I mean, he showed up in his usual casual wear and just totally made fun of himself.
Classic Sandler. He always knows how to lighten the mood.
I love it. Sometimes a little bit of humor is exactly what we need, especially when we're dealing with, some pretty heavy news.
Okay, so speaking of heavy news, let's circle back to that situation in Gaza for a second. Things are still really tense over there, and it's definitely a story we're going to keep following closely.
Yeah, the stakes are incredibly high, and any escalation of violence could have devastating consequences for the whole region.
The international community is really pushing for a peaceful resolution, but it's unclear what the path forward is going to look like.
It's a really complex situation with a lot of history and a lot of competing interests at play. It's a reminder that peace is fragile, and it takes constant work and dialogue to maintain it.
And it's also a reminder of how quickly things can change. What's dominating the headlines today might be old news tomorrow.
Yeah, that's the nature of the news cycle. The world keeps spinning, and there are always new challenges and new opportunities emerging.
Which is why it's so important to stay informed and engaged, to keep learning, keep asking questions, to keep using our voices to make a difference. It's so true. And it can feel really overwhelming sometimes, trying to keep up with everything that's going on in the world. But I think it's important to remember that we're not just, passive bystanders. We all have a responsibility to learn to engage and to use our voices to try to make a difference.
I couldn't agree more. Even those small actions can have a ripple effect. And when we work together, we can actually create some pretty amazing change.
So as we wrap up today's show, what's the biggest takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with? What should they be thinking about as they go about their day?
Well, I think what really stood out to me today is just how interconnected our world is. We talked about everything from that ceasefire in Gaza to sustainable tourism in Switzerland to those wildfires in LA. And it just shows you that the decisions that are made in one part of the world, they have an impact on everyone everywhere.
That's a really good point.
So I think it's more important than ever to stay informed, to be open to different perspectives, and to, really understand that we're all part of this global community.
Beautifully said. It's easy to feel powerless sometimes when you look at all the challenges that the world's facing, but we're not. Our choices, our actions, our voices, they all matter.
And even amidst all the uncertainty and all the bad news, there's still so much good out there. I mean, think about those people who are renting chickens because they can't afford eggs, or those inspiring stories of resilience and creativity that we saw at the Oscars.
There's always a reason to have hope.
Exactly. And there's always a reason to believe in the power of human ingenuity and our ability to, to make things better.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us today, everyone. And we'll see you back here tomorrow for more news and analysis from around the globe.
Until then, stay curious and stay engaged.